Welcome everybody. Welcome everyone and thank you for joining us this afternoon for our Core Maths webinar with David Greenwood. My name is Sabika Cummins and I'm your Educational Resource Consultant for WA. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered and pay our respects to the elders both past and present. Firstly, I want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be distributed by email to all those that are registered after the event. You can also ask questions in the Q&A box that you'll be able to see at the bottom of your screen. We will be constantly monitoring this during the webinar, plus there will be time at the end of the webinar for more questions. At the end of the webinar, there will also be a feedback form that we ask you to fill in with your feedback, and also this is where you'll be able to request your complimentary textbook. Please let me introduce our panelists, Scott Halligan, Commissioning Editor Education, and our presenter, David Greenwood. David is the Head of Mathematics at Trinity Grammar School. He has been writing for Cambridge for 30 years and in that time has authored more than 30 titles. He has been at the forefront of our success with the Essential Maths AC series, our current Gold editions, and of course, our new Core series. Without further ado, please let me welcome David Greenwood. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Sabika. Great to be here, and thank you everyone for coming along to this webinar today. Obviously, good to have you. The idea is to introduce the new Core series that's being published this year, ready for use next year. Many of you would be aware that the Essential Mathematics for the Australian Curriculum 3rd edition was published last year, and some of you might even be using that this year. So in a sense, there's two series that I'd like to talk about. Obviously, Core, the new one, but I'd like to draw some connections with the Essential Mathematics for the Australian Curriculum 3rd edition as well, so you can see how the two series are linked for Cambridge. So I'd like to use two words tonight for the two series, the word core for the new Core series and the word essential for the other series that I referred to that was published last year. Now, just from the outset, I'd like to say that the Core series essentially replaces the Gold editions that have been in print now for quite a few years. And so this new Core series is essentially a new edition of the Gold series. So with some level of detail, I'd like to draw on the connections between the Core series and the companion Essential series, ways in which the Core series can be used to create a wide variety of differentiated learning pathways. I'd like to cover some of the new tools for self-learning and diagnostic assessment, some of the new mapping and literacy resources, which are very important in the new Core series, and of course, some of the latest digital interface and teaching and assessment resources that come along with the new Core series. I might also mention that Scott Halligan, who was introduced earlier, might be adding to my comments, and thank you, Scott, for coming in from time to time as I run through the main points of the Core series.
No worries.
Okay, so to start off, I'd just like to mention some of the common elements between the Core series and the Essential series. In our school, we use both series, and it's important to know what the connections are. But first of all, it's very important to note that both series contain all the content to cover the Australian curriculum content descriptors. It's true that the Essential series goes a little bit further, and it has its extended and 10A sections, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But in terms of the standard 7 to 10 content descriptors for the Australian curriculum, both series do cover them. Both series have strong differentiated learning pathways via the classification of the sections and from the work programs, which I'll talk about in more detail today. And they both now have very similar types of print and digital resources, including things like progress quizzes, print versions, auto-mark versions, and digital workspaces, and so on. Now, unique to core, the core series, you could say that there is more time spent reviewing key content before moving forward. Okay, there's less extension sections and 10A sections in the core series. And so there's more time creating lessons there to review key content and more time exploring that level of the Australian curriculum. There's more of a gentler gradient through the content, through the problems in the exercises, and a little more spreading out, if you like, of the proficiency strands in this core series. And all the linked assessment and resources for the core series are, of course, adapted for that series and therefore are suitable for that level of mathematics. On the other hand, for Essential, there are more sections devoted to extension and enrichment, and therefore there's more compact review of earlier content. There's a wider variety of problems of varying difficulty through the higher level Essential series. And of course, this opens up extensions to, say, math methods and specialist maths at year 11 and 12. Okay, so what I'd like to do first is just put these two series into context with the 3 levels of differentiation that teachers can work with to try to help students with their level of mathematics at the level of mathematics that is pitched at your school. So the first level of differentiation is which book you're going to use. Obviously, there's core and essential, and by making a choice here is a pretty big step in trying to differentiate for a class or for a number of students. And I'll talk a little bit about how both books could be used with a mixed ability class or within different settings within schools a little bit later on in this webinar. But that is the first level of differentiation. The second level, of course, is which sections a teacher might choose to teach in the year. And this is where the authors have spent some time trying to define in the book what sections are consolidating material, covering key content of the Australian curriculum from previous years, and they're called consolidating sections, and then which sections go beyond the Australian curriculum, leaving all the remaining sections classified as Australian curriculum sections for that section. So that's the second level of differentiation, choosing which sections to cover. And then the third level is choosing the pathway through each lesson. And that's called our work programs. And there are 2 work programs for the core and 3 work programs for Essential, which I'll go into some detail in a few moments. So with regard to choosing sections, the second level of differentiation, you can see with these 2 examples, the Essential maths on the left and the core on the right. You can see for year 9 indices and surds, we have classified index notation as consolidating because that covers ideas that were developed in year 8. And for the core example, there's a revision or review of probability before they start the content for year 10. There are 2 extending sections in the year 9 Essential Chapter 6, and they are clearly classified there, where work has been done to introduce the idea of surds and how indices relate to surds. And we all know that that is extending beyond the year 9 curriculum, but it does open pathways to 10 and 10A, and that will hopefully provide some flexibility for schools. For core, we have not defined any sections as extending because we actually really don't go beyond the Australian curriculum for that level. And the year 10 core, for example, doesn't cover the 10A curriculum. However, the authors did feel that there were a number of challenging areas of the Australian curriculum, and we have put a gold star on those sections just to help teachers decide what might be less or more challenging for their classes. Many of you might agree that conditional probability and independent events while being in the standard Australian curriculum are two challenging or more challenging elements of probability at that level. For the third level of differentiation, I refer to the work programs, and this is where we have three possible work programs for essential and two for the core series. And as students work through the different proficiency strands, they can see which problems they might like to do depending on which work program has been set for them. So in the essential series, the left is considered the easiest, then the standard, and then the most challenging, or the extension program. The advanced program would be the right one. So the right-hand one includes the enrichment question. It includes the more challenging problem solving and reasoning, and it includes a lighter selection of fluency questions, where with the most recent additions and with the core additions coming up, the new core, we are not just using the half fraction, we're using thirds and quarters as well, just to give us that extra level of flexibility. Those work programs in the digital version are live. So when students click on those tabs on their digital textbook, the questions that are not listed will disappear, including the fractions of questions as well. Now, for the benefit of planning curriculum and setting up work for your classes, those work programs are summarised as Word documents into a single 1 or 2 page document, which could be used as part of your curriculum planning, or it could even be handed out to students at the start of a topic to show what is the base lesson by lesson structure for this particular unit and what questions to refer to. They are available on the teacher resource website and can be downloaded as Word documents. To summarise these 3 differentiated learning programs, we have this little poster, which is going to be updated for the new core series. On the left, we have the core, and on the right, we have the essential, and you can see that there are 5 suggested pathways through with a high level of flexibility from one year to the next. So using the core series on the left, the 2 possible pathways through could be perhaps choosing all the consolidating and core sections and only a selected number of gold star sections, but then maybe using the left tab, which is the easier selection of problems. Or at the other end of the scale, using the essential series, one might choose less consolidating lessons, but then choose more extending or 10A lessons, and at the same time, choose the advanced work program. So this would be the most challenging program, and that perhaps might lead to the highest level of maths, just generally called Math C here, but we know that as methods and specialist.
David, I'll just jump in before you go on and say that we will update this poster for the WA senior courses and show the links between essential applications and methods and specialists. So this is just for the main thing to pay attention here is just the 7 to 10 material. But when we update this poster, we'll let the reps know and we'll make it available.
Fantastic. Okay, good. So one of the things this poster tries to do is to show that both series can be used in the same school, offering a high degree of flexibility where students are not necessarily locked into a particular path and they could move from one class to the next. And the main reason for that is that the core series and the essential series have been written side by side. So there's an extremely strong correlation between the books from 7 right through to 9, with year 10 being the odd one out in a sense, because with all the 10A material, it was not possible to ensure that the chapters were more or less covering the same thing in year 10. But year 7 to 9, the correlation between the chapters is very strong, and it would be possible to teach the same topic to every student and use different textbooks. So it's for year 7 and 8, it is chapter for chapter, where the correlation is identical in terms of what the chapters are called. But for year 9, the course series splits the first chapter of Essential into 2, where there's a whole chapter for revising number and fractions and so on, and there's another chapter devoted purely to financial mathematics. The core catches up in the end because Essential does a whole chapter on parabolas, which is mainly extension to the Australian curriculum in year 9. But the strong correlation is there. To highlight this correlation and to show teachers and students how both books could even be used in the same class, there is a document available for teachers and students to show which sections correlate with which. So in this example, 8F in Essential doesn't exist in Core because it's extending. And so when the students using Essential are doing 8G, these Core students are doing 8F, which is the same topic. And that's another file available for teachers. Now, some of the new features of Core. One of them is the diagnostic assessment tools that we have. We've always had a pre-test or a warm-up quiz printed into the text, and that will remain. And this is a sort of a reviewing and a making connections type of test. It's not really a test on the content of the up-and-coming topic. And so a new diagnostic test has been formed where teachers could find out how much students already know from the topic that's about to be taught. And for both of these diagnostic tests, there are handout versions, printable handout versions, and there are also auto-marked digital versions on the system for teachers to perhaps set on the night before, where the marking, of course, is being done. One of the new features for Essential Maths last year and will be taken across and added to Core series is the learning intentions. And we know there's quite a significant amount of evidence which suggests that it's important to be very clear to students at the start of the lesson what the learning intentions or objectives are for that unit. So the learning intentions tells students what they should know and understand and be able to do by the end of the lesson. And this can provide a lot of focus. It can unpack the curriculum or the content descriptors beyond the elaborations in the Australian curriculum, more or less defining what those content descriptors might mean at a lesson level, and then help to assess the level of achievement that we're aiming for. And this will connect strongly with the success criteria, which I'll talk about a little bit later in the webinar. Now, the language used for these learning intentions is to know, to understand, or be able to. And you can see all three of those are highlighted in the top example there from the Essential series, Year 10, Trigonometry. Intentions for one of the sections there. For the course series, we have a similar policy. Now, in this particular example, there are less learning intentions because what's trying to be achieved in trigonometry in that particular section is much less than what's in the Essential series. Mainly because in trigonometry, the Essential series is covering quite a lot of 10A material as well, whereas in the Core series, there is more time spent building up the knowledge of the standard Year 10 curriculum. One of the things you can see there on the second example is that with the Core series, we are adding as well the key vocabulary for that section. And so that is being listed there. It's also being supported by definitions in the key ideas and also in the glossary, which I will mention later as well. These learning intentions for the Core series are going to be collated, or they are collated, in a Word document for the creation of various curriculum documents that you might, as a teacher, have to provide for your school. Now, the other main feature I'd like to talk about, just moving through a section, if you like, would be to talk about the examples. Now, the examples for core are a little bit different to the essential because they are positioned throughout the exercise and are sitting just before the most relevant question. Okay, so these are for perhaps weaker students, and these particular students might find it helpful to have in the textbook the example a little bit closer to the question they are doing. And there are usually in the core series less parts to the example. So the examples are more divided up as opposed to the essential series where all the examples sit together after the key ideas. Each example retains its video and the solution and explanation, but the new feature of the series, which is being transferred to the core series, is the introduction of the now you try question. So what we were finding as authors and also hearing from other teachers is that many teachers were using the examples, which is great. They were using them as a demonstration, they were looking at the explanation, running it through with their students, maybe using these in a flipped learning model for their students. And students were using the examples as a reference, of course. So we felt there was an opportunity to provide another question very similar to that example, which then students or teachers could use to see how proficient the student was in relation to that previous example that's already been used. So the solution and the answer is not sitting next to it, and so could be used to test the students on how they're going, but the answers are in fact provided in the text as part of the answer section. All right, moving on to the exercises. I won't spend too much time on the exercises. People who have used the Essential series before know that the questions are divided up into the different proficiency strands where the authors have attempted to write questions to cover all the 4 proficiency strands and provide some enrichment or extension in both series, actually. So with understanding, making connections, building knowledge and develop understanding. One thing we have done though for the new core series is to review the understanding questions closely and rewrite them in such a way that teachers could use them instead of like setting an exercise, they could use them as key points or key ideas in a discussion. And this is to provide flexibility for teachers who wish to try to build understanding as a class group rather than setting this as part of the exercise. So that flexibility is there for teachers to choose. The fluency questions with their tabs, remember using halves and thirds and quarters is there with their work programs, and there's a range of problem solving and reasoning questions as well. The idea being there that students get to experience some problem solving and reasoning with a unique level of grading within those proficiency strands. So even using the left tab in the differentiated work programs, those students who are selecting the easiest problems will still get a selection of problem solving and reasoning questions. One of the key features that we are retaining is the progress quiz. And this is now a handout and an auto-marked version. So depending on how teachers would like to use this, could use it as like a handout with spaces, possibly done at the start of a class, or it could be set as an auto-marked quiz, or students could just do it at any time as a bit of formative assessment about halfway through the section. In terms of applications, we retain the Maths at Work in the core series. So an application investigation, exploring a place of work and all the mathematics and formulas and so on are related to that line of work, but also corresponding closely to the content of that lesson. Alternatively, in the Essential series, we have instead the applications and problem-solving pages, which are a collection of 3 problems, scaffolded extended response type questions where students need to formulate ideas, interpret and communicate their solutions that way. Now, one of the bigger and more important new features of Core corresponds to one of the new features of Essential, and that is our modelling activities, which are printed into the text and, of course, on the digital version as well. So perhaps there's a difference between a modelling task and doing an extended response application question, and that is perhaps where we try to give students a little more experience in trying to formulate their own ideas, solve some problems and communicate their solutions. But we understand that this can be difficult for students. So we have adopted a structure here where we have divided each modelling task per chapter into 3 main sections. You can see with this particular example, we have an introduction, and students have a problem where they need to get from A to C, and they have to use trigonometry and bearings to investigate paths from C to A without going through the marshland. So they have to come up with 2 straight paths, thinking about the bearings, the distances covered, and so on, and eventually work towards perhaps a solution which minimises the distance between C and A, and then later investigating what might happen to their solution if the position of A was altered or the position of the marshland was altered. But what we do is we start off with a preliminary task. It's just a series of questions which get them thinking a little bit about how to work out the distance around the marshland, just to get them warmed up. Then the modelling task gets them to think about what's important, what diagrams I need to write down, and then to sketch a possible path around the marshland before moving on to solving the problem, where they need to explore a couple of things, calculate distances, and construct a number of paths and communicate what bearings are being used and what graphs are being used and so on, before moving into the other elements of modelling, which is evaluate and verify, where they compare the different paths and explain what they've done, and then, of course, have an opportunity to write up their responses in sort of more of a report rather than a series of answers in a space. We have an extension question or 2 in all the modelling tasks. One of the things the authors are doing at the moment is coming up with a possible rubric for teachers to show how a modelling task like this could be marked. And this would be available as a Word document that could be altered as well. The Cambridge series retains the investigations that we've always had for both Core and Essential. And as well as that, we also have our problems and challenges in the Essential series, but the flavour is more puzzles and games for Core. One of the new features of Core, and with the Essential series that was printed last year or published last year, is the success criteria. And the idea is to have some success criteria at the end of every chapter to help teachers and students decide as to whether or not we have in fact achieved the key learning intentions that we talked about earlier. So as well as providing the language, I can identify an equation, I can classify an equation as true and false and so on, we've also tried to supply an example to help students understand what that success criteria means and the links as well. So if students are having trouble with that idea, they know where to head back to. The mind map summary for Core and Essential is retained with basically a 1, sometimes 2 page summary of the key ideas of the unit. We also retain the semester reviews, where there are a number of multiple choice, short answer and extended response questions for summarising, say, before an exam at the end of the year. But for each chapter, we know that there was a chapter review, but for this new series, we have reordered the short answer and the multiple choice. So we've decided that it would be better to do the short answer first, which is a more comprehensive review, if you like, of the main ideas in the chapter before filling the gaps with 10 multiple choice and a couple of extended response questions. Now, Scott, I did forget to mention earlier about during the exercises, I'll probably mention this again when we go to the digital, but for the core series, one thing that's unique to the core series is that we have little hints every now and again through the exercises. So where the authors felt that some students might get stuck, there is a little hint or a reminder of one of the key ideas or something to help them get started with the questions. So the first thing that they don't do is perhaps put their hand up.
Yep, thanks, David. I would say there's probably maybe 4 to half a dozen hints for every exercise. It might be a good point now just to ask another question that someone had relating to the exercises in core and essential, and that is, if we took a subtopic in a chapter that was equivalent, that the equivalent subtopic in core and in essential, could you describe the differences in the exercise questions between how they're treated in core and also in essential? And one person in particular just wanted to know how much crossover in questions there are between the two exercises in each series.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. But sometimes I'll first say that sometimes that a section in the essential series could be 2 lessons or 2 sections in core. So it's important to note that first, where core series takes a little bit longer. But yes, there is a strong correlation between most sections, especially in year 7, 8 and 9. So probably the biggest difference is that the grading of questions in core is much shallower. So yes, there are in fact some questions which are the same in both series, but the core series has been re-authored, if you like, to make sure that the grading is very gentle and it just does not go as far. So one of the questions, say in the problem solving for essential, could even be the enrichment question for core. Another big difference is there's less parts in most of the core questions. So the number of leaps, if you like, or the size of the leap between one question and the next question is much less in the core series.
Thanks, David. Yep, I think we're ready to move on. If there are any more questions about exercises and differences in approaches, we can get to that a bit later. But that's it for now, and we can move on to the end of chapter material.
All right, so I'll just mention the glossary, if that's okay, Scott. We have done a bit of work with the glossary with the core. You might remember with the learning intentions, we did list all the key vocab. And we have done quite a bit of work this time with the key ideas as well, where all the keywords are properly defined in the key ideas for that section. There might be a few added words, important words that might have been defined beforehand or before that section that might be listed in the key vocab if it's important. And then we've made sure that every single one of those words is clearly defined in the glossary as well. All right, so moving on to digital now. There's probably a couple of hours here, Scott, that we could go into with a lot of the digital resources, but perhaps if I could focus on the digital text and the workspaces and Scott, we might get you to talk about some of the teacher resources and auto marking and so on. So what I'd like to do is just share with you a sample of what the course series will look like in the digital form. So you can see on the front page of a section, this is 1E from year 10 core, that the lesson starter is there, the introduction and the key ideas. And you can see in the key ideas, the keywords have been bolded and defined, and the examples are in this section as well. And the examples have their solution and explanation. Remember, each example has a video, and this link would take you to those videos. There are shortcuts down the left-hand side, but just moving through some of the resources and the exercise in particular. Each exercise is collected together like so. And you can see here's the work programs, the live work programs I was talking about. If you were, say, selecting the right-hand work program, that's less understanding, but perhaps more of the other ones. You can see by clicking this tab, the questions that haven't been set do disappear. Now, in the digital form, one of the new features of the core series, which mimics what's going on with Essential now, is that the questions are arranged vertically, and there is the option for teachers to have all the work done by the students in a digital form. Now, our philosophy here is with the digital form that it's just perhaps not good enough to just have an answer box digitally, because we believe this means that students would be not encouraged to do their working properly onto either their workbook by hand. But in this case, we have now a work space where students can do a digital solution. They could type their solution, they could upload an image if they've done some work somewhere else, or they could draw as well. So in this space, they can write their solution. Sorry about my messy writing here, but I'm just going to show a little bit of working to see how this works. I'm going to put in a few numbers, and therefore the answer would be E. Now, all this information you can see is being saved to the server, and all this information, including what students write, will be available to the teachers of those classes. Students can check their answer, and they can also provide feedback to their teacher about how they're going, from red right through to green. And if students need help with a particular question, they're really having trouble, what they can do is click this box, and this comes up as a red flag for the teacher, and I'll show you some of the feedback from the database when Scott starts talking a little bit about that now. But before he does, I might just mention a few other features. The walkthroughs and quizzes. The walkthroughs are live examples. That's sort of a learning opportunity, and the quizzes as well. So Essential has 3 quizzes corresponding to the 3 work programs, and the core has 2 quizzes. And these are auto-marked quizzes feeding data back to the system for the teachers. All the resources are summarised, including hot sheets and a range of other things, and as well as the Desmos graphing calculator tools. One of the ones I'm using a lot lately is the geometry tool. Most people are familiar with graphing tools, but they might be familiar with something like Geometry Sketchpad or Cabri Geometry, but this is a very easy version of those where teachers can easily construct, or students can construct, objects to explore different aspects of a circle. I'll just measure an angle, and it's there you go, 59 degrees, perhaps not the right one. Let's do this one over here. 1, 2, 3. There we go. There's another one, and you can see they can drag things around to alter the angles. So these features are built in, and they don't need to move off to a different website to do that. Now, just jumping to some of the teacher resources, I have referred to a few of them, Scott, but I might just look up a couple now.
That dashboard, going back to the dashboard, might not be active in this sample, David. But
that's right. I'm
I
using the
can just
sample
describe
version here, so I'm not sure if I can see all the teacher resources. But if you could just talk about a couple of them, that would be great.
Sure. So as with the essential, the standard Australian curriculum essential book, they'll on the dashboard that David was trying to get back to there. There'll be a place for all the teacher resources. So that includes various curriculum support documents, as well as the working programs, the collation of all of the working programs for the exercises that David mentioned before. It'll have a curriculum grid for the Australian curriculum. It will also have some documents, a document about teaching if you're at a school that uses both the essential series as well as the core series. That document will be in there as well. And in terms of all of the various tests and worksheets and so on, there are more types available in the core series than there are in the essential series. So in the standard essential series, you have access to 4 differentiated chapter tests, test A, B, C, and D that you might have seen and be using, as well as a few worksheets per chapter. For core, as well as that, chapter tests and worksheets are also skill sheets. So those are pretty self-explanatory. They tend to be skill and drill type worksheets, focusing on a couple of the key skills within a chapter. There could be 2 or 3 or up to 4 or 5 per chapter, depending on what the topic is. There are also maths literacy activities. So that's something, again, that's unique to core. And the intention with those, again, it's fairly self-explanatory, but the intention there is to present students with a few different activities for the topic that relate to getting familiar with using the mathematical language within the topic. And so that includes things like being presented with some kind of diagram or visual representation of a concept, and students having to describe in words mathematically what's going on, or just making sure that they can, in their own words, outline definitions and use the mathematical terminology as it should be. What else is there? The investigations that David mentioned before are there in Word documents. And there's probably more that I'm forgetting as well, but there are more types available in core than there are in essential. There are also a few different other features that are new this time around. One thing is if it's important to you for convenience or display or whatnot, you can actually, David's got that part of the exercise open there, but you will be able to either activate or deactivate those workspaces. If you're a school or a classroom who doesn't want to use that feature that David demonstrated before, you can just hide those, so you'll be able to see all the exercise questions without the workspaces. And there are a few different other features that you'll see. Here is a view of the summary of students' work when they do go through the exercise and use the workspaces and the self-assessment. So you can see those pie charts there, they're color-coded, matching the percentage of questions that students have self-assessed as red or yellow, orange, or green there, as well as a overall completion percentage, so that you get an idea, even if a student may have self-assess themselves with all green, if they've only completed 4%, then that gives you an indication you might not all otherwise have had. And likewise, if a student has tried hard and completed the entire exercise or any of the work that you've asked of them, but they might have struggled, it's important to know that they've tried hard as well. So you can also see the red flags there as well. David, I can't remember, did you mention the red flags before when we talked about the self-assessment?
Yes, I did mention the red flag.
Yeah.
So back with the digital exercise, the option there at the bottom of a question to indicate that you're having trouble with the question. So
Yep.
students can, let them know, let teachers know. And yes, so teachers can see from their database how many red flags for a particular person, or if they wish, they can see these red flags corresponding to which question. And so teachers could easily see at that point if there's any common red flags across a range of questions, and that might help teachers define which questions might be good to discuss, say, at the start of the lesson.
That's correct. And incidentally, we'll be streamlining this a little bit when these books come out to make it so that red flags and self-assessment, say you can see question 8 there goes up to part I. So instead of having self-assessment red flags for every single part, given that they're all pretty similar, they'll just do it for the question as a whole, say question 8 in total, which will make things a little bit more simple to see what's going on there.
Okay, good. So thank you.
Sorry, one final thing, David, and I don't think we have a visual of this, but this is something that if you're able to access some of the marketing material or able to get in touch with your rep, this goes for both core and the main essential series, is the directed tasks feature, the new task manager that we've put together. And this is a very powerful way of setting up online activities for your students through an entire topic. So for example, Dave and I have worked on some templates that will allow you to set up a class so that for every single topic, you'll be able to set a pathway through using the various digital assets here that David has mentioned before. So things like the widgets and the video demonstrations, the walkthroughs, all of those things, you'll be able to set up a pathway for your students, they could all be different depending on their ability level, so that they go through one by one all of the activities through a particular topic, again tailored to their ability level. So that's a feature that would require an hour or two to describe. So again, I encourage you to get in touch with your rep to find out more about that.
Good, thank you, Scott. So I might finish up the main slides here for the webinar, and then we'll take questions and also hand back to Sabika in a minute. But look, often we get questions about how core might fit into your school. And so very loosely here, what I'm doing here is defining 3 types of schools, I guess. And one could say that if you felt that you were were working in a high performing school, and I know there's plenty of those around, of course, then perhaps core might fit into those schools for specific classes, or individuals, even in a mixed ability classroom, on a definite pathway through to general or essential mathematics. For a medium level school, it could be that perhaps a number of classes are using core and a number of classes are using essential, providing that flexibility to move from one to the other, especially at year 7, 8 and 9, where there's a strong correlation between topics being taught between the 2 books. I was only speaking recently to the head of maths of a school in Bendigo, and they were using the core for 3 classes and the essential book for 3 classes. Or a lower level ability school, perhaps, then it could even be that the majority of classes in the school are using core, and there might be 1 or 2 classes that are using essential, where there is the option to perhaps head on to math methods at the end. All right, so that might lead to a couple more questions. So what I might do first, though, Sabik, if I can hand back to you to finish up your slides.
Thank you, David and Scott, very much for your presentation. It was very informative, and I'm sure all the attendees will think so as well. I just have a couple of slides that I would like to go through together. No, won't be a moment. Share screen. Why isn't it doing it? There we go. Everyone can see my slides, hopefully. And there's only a few there, so bear with me. Obviously, we have a few options available, and the first one is print and digital at $69.95. That also includes the interactive textbook and a PDF. Digital only is at $57.95, and that includes the interactive textbook and a PDF that the students can download and work offline. And of course, we have our teacher resource package that both David and Scott have put many hours and amazing resources together. And if your school does either book lists or buys class sets, then that is complimentary to your school. When is stock due? Year 7 is out in October, Year 8 in December, Year 9 in November, and Year 10 in September. And at the end of the presentation, when you log out or when your webinar closes, there will be a link that we ask you to complete. There is just some quick questions there asking for your feedback, but more importantly, this is where you tell us which textbook you would like. So which year level you would like for us to send to you, and this will be available once they're published. So obviously those dates. So the first one is Year 7 and Year 10 if you want to see a textbook straight away. Thank you. And is there any more questions? We can take some questions if anyone would still like to ask them.
Sabika, I think we've got through most of the questions that people have had. One person just wanted to know when the books are expected. I mean, from my point of view, as the publisher, they're all will be published later on this year. We've had some delays with typesetters and printers. The kinds of delays that are affecting almost every business worldwide because of the COVID pandemic and the various lockdowns that have affected businesses in almost every country. So a lot of the businesses that we work with have had to work from home, like we have here at Cambridge, and it has pushed dates out a little bit. But you can keep in touch with Sabika as well for dates, and if there's anything in particular you want to see, you can just let her know, and myself or David will provide that, because the pages are essentially ready, but we're just experiencing a few little delays with the final parts of the typesetting process.
And thank you, Scott. And page proofs will be online soon. So obviously before the textbooks will be in stock. So links for the page proofs will go out once they go online. And I have your contact details. So if you would like to see them, I will send you the links as soon as I have them. And there's also a link to a sample of the interactive chapter for core. So I will follow up with everyone that has attended today, and I will send you the link for that as well.
Thanks, Rebecca. And one more question here. That's from Sasha, and she's just wondering how it would work if a school would like to use both the core and the essential standard series at the same school.
Is that a question for me, Scott?
No, sorry, mate. You could talk about it, David, but I think it's more a logistical thing for Sabika. If they wanted to use both series, I would imagine, Sabika, they would just get in touch with you and.
Yeah, I mean, we have book list schools that will put both series on a book list. They will just tell the students what book they will need to get, or they usually put the class. So it might be Year 7 blue, might get a core book, and the Year 7 red might be allocated the essentials book. Or we have class set or book hire school markets that do actually buy both textbooks, because as David said, they can be used in conjunction within a class. and you can use class sets in mixability scenarios, correct, David?
That's correct, yes. So, yeah, it would be interesting if students did change pathway, say halfway through a year, and needed to change textbook, then that might be a slight issue. But if schools perhaps had a couple of spare books lying around, then if there are any situations like that, then students wouldn't need to buy 2 books.
No, and what we do, because we understand that does happen a lot, and as long as the student has bought a textbook or the school has bought class sets of both, we can easily swap the interactive resource for them so they have the correct one. Yep, and having a few extra in class is a great idea, definitely.
And Sasha has just asked a follow-up question. She meant using the barcodes if more than one student is using the same book. For example, I have 3 classes, she says, using the same set of books.
Oh, okay. Well, unfortunately, that's not going to work because the textbook is designed for 1 textbook per student or one digital code per student. We understand that schools do share textbooks, but what you could probably do in that respect is if you only want to purchase a class set of 30, but you have 60 students, is purchase the digital only of the, for the extra students. And then that way you have all 60 on a digital resource. They all have access to their text online interactive resource, because the main advantage of our textbook is that students can do things, they work online. They can have their own individual working out in their exercise spaces. Teachers will get reports. Now, this won't happen if they're sharing the resource. You won't be able to see how your individual students are tracking, because they can't actually have their own interactive textbook, which is the big plus of, I suppose, of our series after all the work that's gone in. So yes, you can purchase additional codes. I hope that answers it.
Yeah, thank you very much. That appears to, a final sort of logistical question here from Helen. What happens to the access to digital when the year rolls over? Do we get a new set of access codes given the current one is being used?
Okay, very good question, Helen. If it's a class set market and you have bought a class set or book hire market of the textbooks, the following year we offer you the chance to purchase the interactive textbook for only $19.95. So that's a huge saving. We don't make you purchase the textbook again or the digital code again. Just $19.95 will give you access to all the online resources for your new cohort coming through. In a book list market, the students do have the opportunity to sell on their books and purchase a a reactivation code for $19.95 as well. And that goes on the book list the following year. So in 2022, a book list school can put a reactivation code for the second-hand market. So we cater for everybody. Everyone gets a chance to reactivate their textbooks.
That is all the questions we had here, and there's one more just popped up just then. From Cherie, what happens if we only activate a book, for example, now? Would online still last for 12 months?
Hi, Cherie. Yes, well, what we would say, it does last for 12 months. It actually will last to the end of next year. The only difference being it has actually been activated, so you can't reactivate it again. So I would say if you have any textbooks that you are looking at activating or using, maybe contact me and I'll be happy to put you on a trial. Then that way you're not wasting your activation code for, on a student for only a few more months left. So please, send me an email, and happy to put anyone on a trial that will expire at the end of this year. And then that way for 2021, you have your textbook and your code ready to go.
Excellent. Another question from Rachel: is there a minimum order? Thinking small schools with classes possibly under 10.
Oh no, you can purchase as many as you want. But the only thing is, when we do provide the complementary teacher resource, we do have a policy where it is a minimum of 20, but what we could do, if you have 10 in each year group, I can definitely, help you out with 1 or 2 teacher resources, but unfortunately the others you would have to pay for them, because that is just our policy at Cambridge.
And that appears to be the end of the questions.
Excellent.
For now. So yeah, thanks very much, Sabika and David,
you,
and I'll let you finish it off, Sabika.
Okay, thank you, David. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time after your busy day to join our webinar. We really appreciate it. I can still see there's quite a few people there, so thank you for staying to the end. And once it's finished, don't forget to fill in the feedback form and let us know what free textbook you want. And I know most of you, so you have my email address. Please contact me if you have any further questions, and I'll be happy to answer them. And I'm also available for one-on-one webinars with your faculty at a time that is convenient for you. So good night, everybody. Thank you. Stay safe.